Alright folks, I've just finished reading The Lord of the Rings for, I think it's only the second time, but it might be the third. This beautiful old set that I bought on the South Bank in the early 90s. 15 quid for 3 volumes. And it's sat on my shelf, I think, since then. I don't think I've read it since the early 90s. And wow, I've got feelings, I've got thoughts. First of all, the emotional hit. Incredible. The story of Sam and Frodo and Mordor. Mordor is just, yeah, I shall forever remember my drive on Saturday night as I drove from Oban to the slipway at Claonaig to sleep there and catch the ferry the next morning back to Arran. I was listening to the chapter called The Tower of Cirith Ungol. Am I going to give spoilers? I think I will, it's an old enough book, isn't it? Frodo's been captured by the orcs after almost being eaten by Shelob, and Sam goes to rescue him from the tower, which is being held by orcs. I was listening to the Andy Serkis narration, and he does the orc voices really, really well. Absolutely superb. So for a late night drive in Argyll on a summer's night, listening to that story, wow, it's just amazing. Such a fond memory I'm going to have of that. And then yesterday, Sunday, I had a sunny day, a recovery day after a long day away on Saturday to Tyree. I got to spend the day finishing the book, and many times my eyes got moist as I read of the courage, the bravery, the loyalty, the honour. And then when we get to the scouring of the Shire at the end, just to see the hobbits changed, you know, I'm tearing up now thinking about it. To see them coming from that experience that they've just had, coming together in leadership roles to free the Shire from the raiders, or whatever it is they're called, the rebels, the baddies that have taken over the Shire. And the reason I read Lord of the Rings at this point in time is because I just listened to a couple of podcast episodes on The Rest is History, where they discussed Tolkien's background and the writing of the book, some of his biography about his time during the war. And they were quoting from a book that I've forgotten the name of. I'm going to have to go back and listen to those episodes, which will be more meaningful now because I've just read the book. And they were quoting from a biography of Tolkien's, which I would really like to read. A biography of Tolkien. And you can really feel the wartime elements or the wartime influences, you know, which I don't think I would have picked up on the first time I read it. The idea of, you know, in the First World War, what were they called? The Central Powers having taken over the lands that they had, and the trench warfare that ensued from the Allies' side. And, you know, I haven't read that much about World War I. I did do some study of the causes of it in my higher history class. That's a long, long time ago. So, yeah, I would really like to read that biography without really going too much into the history of the war. I don't need to do that, but the fact that this is called the War of the Rings, you know, is, yeah, it's so much more meaningful to read it at this age in my 50s, when I've got so much more life experience. And I can relate it now to the situation I'm in with regard to leadership and being a better man and loyalty and honour and all these worthy virtues and concepts that are all there front and centre in this book. And the way that at the end of it, when they come back, that they've changed. And you might say that the Shire hasn't changed, but it has. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to have had. But they themselves have changed in a fundamental way. So much so that Frodo doesn't feel able to stay on anymore. You know, the book ends with his leaving, with the elves and with Bilbo, the ring bearers, as they leave Middle-earth, you know. And it reminded me of coming back from Ukraine. I spent a year in Ukraine in the 90s as part of my university course. And coming back home again after a year spent there, I was changed quite fundamentally, but my hometown was not. And then I got back to uni, and I had changed, but uni had not. And you know, where I'd left feeling a bit incompetent with regards to speaking Russian, when I got back, it became apparent quite quickly that my competence level had skyrocketed, and that was part of the point, but there was much more to it than that. It was about the culture and the change and the adventure, you know, the hero's journey, and that's writ large in the Lord of the Rings, isn't it? That's what it's all about. Leaving home, going on an adventure and coming back changed, you know. So, yeah, I'm very, very glad to have read this book, and I'm now just about to dive into the Silmarillion for the first time, reading it with a Substack writer, and I'd never really had the urge to read it before, but this old copy here. I'd always felt intimidated by it, because I know it's kind of historical legends and it's deep into the lore, the history of the Middle-earth, but I'm ready for that now. I'm excited to read it with the Substack writer who's leading the read-along. So I'm just about to start it now. I've just read the foreword and I'm about to read J.R.R. Tolkien's letter to his publisher, and then I'm going to dive into what I'm sure is going to be a very exciting read. But yeah, The Lord of the Rings, what an emotional trip it was. And made all the more so by listening to it on some nice drives around Argyll and on walks up in the Hill of Beans, particularly the Tom Bombadil chapter, which I thoroughly enjoyed, reading that and going for a walk up in the forestry. That's what reading's all about, man. Making it as immersive as possible and relating it, if one can, to one's own situation. Fantasy. Yeah, I love it. Thanks for watching.